That should have been a test. Well, good evening. We'll let people kind of float in. These seats in the front row and the middle are fine to take, folks. So if you're looking for a place to sit and you would like to come join us, that would be great. Okay. Well, they're taking pictures. That's why people are standing. Okay, but again, we have plenty of seats here in the front. So welcome. My name is Dan Keister. I'm the faculty advisor to the Economics Club, and we're thrilled to have such renowned speakers and a very strong turnout for our third annual Economics Club debate. This debate is underwritten by the Fred and Mary Koch Foundation. I just want to briefly mention that not only does the Koch Foundation underwrite this debate, but they enable us to take students to the Dallas Fed, where we just had 6 students present research, participate as discussants and moderators, and do a really strong job. And also we brought in Brian Riley from the Heritage Foundation as part of this grant earlier in the year. So this has been an ongoing support that we've had from the Fred and Mary Koch Foundation, and we want to thank them because we've really made the most of it. I'm going to try to be brief, and I assume these arrow buttons work, but maybe not. Oh. And talk briefly about the structure of the evening. Are we just not live on this? And we've been working very hard on this as an Econ 580 class. So several of our students are going to participate to lead off the debate with the first 2 or 3 questions from the audience. After they finish, Isa will be around, there she is, with our microphone. It's very important that you speak into the microphone because we are recording this and we would like the sound to come across really well. So we're pleased about that, or we would be pleased if that works, and I was going to go off my PowerPoint, but nonetheless. So before we get too far into the debate, real briefly, we wanted to take a moment to have our outgoing Econ Club president, Hannah Jones, talk about the events that the Econ Club has sponsored this year. And again, we have a seat for Sahani since she has a question right here in the front. So, Hannah.
Thank you. Hi guys, my name's Hannah. I am, currently the former Econ Club president. I would like to thank Krista and Isa both for having a really great year with the Economics Club, and I would like to congratulate our new Econ Club officers. I would also like to thank Dr. Keister and Dr. Ross for all their help supporting the Econ Club. I know they put a lot of time into that. This time last year, the club was in Boston touring Bain Capital and taking a class from the Harvard Business School. And so it's exciting that a year later we are getting to learn from other great economists. The speakers this semester were, first we had Tom Hemmer from Solomon Corporation. He talked to the group about commodities trades. Then Brian Riley from the Heritage Foundation, who talked about free trade. Kevin Macbeth, who is a KSU graduate in economics, who is currently an actuary, and he talked to us about his career. And then we had Bob Lighton, who recently wrote The $1 Trillion Economist, and he talked to us about his book. If you're not currently a member of the Econ Club, I encourage you to do so. We meet incredible economists and other people in the field, and it is a wonderful opportunity to network and expand your horizons. So thank you for coming, guys.
Thank you, Hannah. And I just want to publicly state what a wonderful job our outgoing officers that are here this evening, Hannah and Krista and Isa, have done. We did just elect new president, vice president, secretary, and treasurer, who are all here in the second row, and we'll have Shauna come up in just a second. The great thing about having such renowned speakers for our debate is I really don't have to say much, and we have a program that says a lot. And these are extremely well-respected, well-renowned economists. And my attempt at brevity is in no way to take away from the remarkable accomplishments of both economists. So, again, we're going to have the structure of the debate, opening statements of 15 minutes each, followed by our pre-selected questions from the Econ 580 class. We're going to approximately say 4 minutes as a response time for each speaker to each question. Basically, and I have little sheets that I'll hold up that say when you're close to running out of time. We'll basically give you one free override. Like if you're like, this one's really important, just bear with me. We're pretty laid back. The great thing is both of our speakers are very congenial, and I think this will be a really great event. So we think we can manage this pretty well. And then I will probably try to judge as best we can when we're going to be close to being time to finish. Right around 8 o'clock, we're going to go to closing statements. And those will be 7 minutes each, which will get us finished before 8:15, at which time many of us, any members of the Econ Club, any advisory council members or our distinguished guests that are here, and anyone else that can talk myself or one of our officers into a free ticket are welcome to go to Wahoo Fire and Ice Grill, where we're going to have a reception and a chance to informally visit with both of our speakers. Today, I was fortunate enough to sit in on an undergraduate discussion with both David and Kevin, and it was a really fascinating hour and a half and really great to watch the way they interact with our students. So we're thrilled to have both of our speakers. Again, I decided to keep this to 2 sentences instead of rambling because our speakers are so renowned, and I looked at the tape last year and I talked way too long. So David Autor is the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Economic Perspectives. He talked briefly to the students today about his unique background, having a PhD from the Kennedy School in public policy at Harvard. And I think that perspective is refreshing, and he has a really great perspective on a number of different things, and we're very pleased to have David Autor here from MIT. Kevin Murphy is here from the University of Chicago. He has been published in numerous publications, professional and mainstream journals and newspapers and magazines. He was the John Bates Clark Medalist in 1997, which is the best economist under the age of 40, extremely prestigious honor in our profession. And again, received his PhD from the University of Chicago and has a wonderful rapport that he showed today with our students. So rather than give our gifts at the end of the talk, we're so confident that our speakers are going to do a great job. We want to bring our new Econ Club president, Shauna, up here. And we had a bird tell us what the hat size would be for Kevin. Go ahead, Shauna, come on up. So we don't know how frequently we can get him to remove a Chicago hat, but we've gotten him a Kansas State hat. You can take the tag out. I apologize for that. That's supposed to be, I was told the size. Hopefully that works. And again, for David, we didn't really know if, we didn't see the hats as frequently. So we have 2 shirts that he could choose from and give me the one that doesn't fit, that has the Power Cat on it as well. So we hope that they both have a wonderful time here, and we're very pleased to have both of our speakers. So let's welcome our speakers, and to show how well prepared I am for this, I'm not exactly sure who's going to give the opening statement first, but again, they're very agreeable gentlemen, so I think one of them will just step up and do that.
Worked on for a long time, and this is an area I think we've both done a substantial amount of research. Pretty hard to cover it all in one evening or even one whole class, but we'll talk about some important features. So our discussion tonight is on inequality, and I'm going to give you kind of a different, you hear a lot about inequality. It's become a major campaign issue. It's become a major issue in public discussions, policy discussions, and the like. I'm going to give you a very kind of what I think of as an economic way of thinking about inequality, because we're going to embed it in really a very standard neoclassical economic model and try to think about like where it comes from and what the economics are behind the growth and inequality. So I'm going to start with inequality on a very particular dimension, and that is the difference in earnings between college and high school graduates. And, you know, this is one aspect of inequality. I think those of you here tonight hopefully know that you earn more, college graduates typically earn more than high school graduates. It's one of the reasons people go to college. Some educators are disappointed about that. They think that you should just want to go to college for its own sake. Economists aren't at all disappointed. We're very happy to see that people would want to go to school because it makes them better off, because that verifies our model. So, you know, economists really started thinking a lot about gains to education back in looking at data in the 1960s. And this vertical axis measures the premium a typical college graduate had relative to a high school graduate, which in that period was about 40%. That is, if you graduated from college, on average, you earned about 40% more than a high school graduate. Pretty good return on education is the way economists think about it. Over the decade of the 70s, that return actually eroded, so that by the time we get to 1979 or so, which is the bottom of that curve, that 40% return had shrunk to the low 20% range, like 22, 23%. Much smaller differential. And Richard Freeman, a well-known economist at Harvard, wrote a paper called The Overeducated American, talking about how, as a society, we'd become overeducated and returns to college weren't what they once were. That was in 1979. To his credit, he actually predicted that returns would come back up. Now, I don't think he ever predicted they'd go to where they went, but he thought they would turn around, and lo and behold, that did happen. So that premium, which had fallen from about 40% to a little over 20%, rose then over the subsequent decades. So by the time we get to the end, by the time we get to the 2000s, the premium is over 70%. So that the benefit of getting a college degree, the difference in earnings between college and high school graduates was far greater by the time we get to the late 2000s than it was even back in the 60s. So we more than reversed that. Now, if you look at graduate school, the premium for having a graduate degree, you see a very similar pattern. It's always higher. You get more premium for getting a graduate degree just as versus an undergraduate degree, but it has a very similar time pattern. That is, falls over the 70s and rises over the 1980s through the 1990s, and is substantially higher than it was previously. Now, there's two ways to think about this. One is to say, wow, there's a growth in inequality. Those college graduates always had an advantage, and now they have a much bigger advantage than they had in the past. Another way to think about it is this is a price. This is the price that the market places on having a higher level of skills, education, whatever you want to call it. And that price today is much greater than it was in the past. And when I talked about an economic approach, that's one of the economic approaches, is to think about these things not just about who gets what, winners and losers, but think about it, what it's telling us about the labor market. That is, the premium on having a college degree today or a graduate degree is much greater than it was in the past. Okay, so that's, and this is, I'll just go ahead. Now, you don't just look at education. It turns out that if we look at inequality generally, and this is a graph that tracks different parts of the distribution. So we're looking at your weekly wage for different groups of individuals. You have the 10th percentile. Think about that as someone near the bottom in the distribution. The 25th, the median, that's the green line, is the 50th percentile, 75th, 90th, and 95th. And you can see that kind of fanning out that happens over this period of time. Would have been better to do this on a log plot, but people hate logs for some reason, so we did it on a levels plot. But that's the picture for men, and you can see the widening. This is the corresponding picture for women. Again, you see that substantial widening. So not only has the premium for education gone up, that is, the differential between college and high school is larger than it used to be, the differential is higher across other things as well, not just education. You look within college graduates, within high school graduates, we have rising inequality. Again, there's two ways to think about it. The haves have more, the have-nots have less relative, or the premium that the market's paying for being at the top of the skill distribution is higher than it was before. If we put this together, comparison over time, we can do a plot and we look at the percentile of the wage distribution here. This is the low end of the distribution. This is the high end of the distribution. And we measure over what's a 40-year period from about 1970 to 2010, 40 years. We measure how much wages went up. And you can think about that. It's like 0.4 is like 1% per year. 0.8 would be 2% per year because it's a 40-year period. So you can see that within women and within men, the expansion in inequality. And this graph, I think, has an important lesson because it says there's been growth in inequality, but there's been growth in inequality throughout the wage distribution over this period of time. That is, there's more inequality between the 20th and the 40th, between the 40th and the 60th, between the 60th and the 80th, and on up the distribution. What that means to me is it says the growth in inequality is a very pervasive phenomenon. That is, if you look over this long period of time, we see not just the very rich pulling away from everybody else, or the very poor falling away from everybody else, but over that long period, we see, in fact, a widening of inequality along lots of dimensions, okay? Both the low end and the high end. Interesting, the one dimension on which there's big substantial narrowing of inequality is between men and women. Because women in every percentile have done better than men, but the growth in inequality measured by the slope of those curves is pretty similar for the men and women. So rising inequality within men, rising inequality within women, but narrowing inequality between men and women. And I don't know, David, you might be talking some about that. Okay, so that's the story. We have the story of growing premia for more skilled women relative to less skilled women, more skilled men relative to less skilled men, more educated men relative to less, all the way across the board. So the market is telling us rising premium. Well, why? What causes prices to go up? What determines what happens to prices in a marketplace? Well, I'm going to skip that. I'm just going to go ahead. Oh, couple things I wanted to talk about. So this is a picture of by time. Before I get to why, let me go by time. This is the growth in wages by percentile for different time periods. And the one thing I want you to take away from this is that the story's somewhat different if you look at different periods. In the earliest period, which is roughly the first 10 years, most of the growth in inequality was toward the bottom. The next period, which is the 80s, where the biggest growth in inequality was across the board. That is, the line slopes up forever. David's done a lot about this, which is the 90s, where a period where we kind of had the middle was sort of falling out. I think you call hollowing out, people call it. There's various terms people use. Actually, what's kind of interesting is the period where we've gotten all the press actually is the period where there's the least going on. It's actually interesting. It's the cumulative effect of all this. So there's this long term. So the idea that inequality has made it to the news sort of shows you the news cycle. It's like 40 years in the making, and finally we get there, you know? So it's an important phenomenon, but it's not new. It's been going on for a long time. But if you look over the period as a whole, you can just see how big it is. That is, the real growth for guys at the bottom is essentially zero in wages, and for guys near the top, it's about 50%. That's a huge expansion of inequality. But the interesting thing is my graph here is from like the 5th percentile to the 95th. So I don't even have the guys who are all in the news today on here. The guys in the news are like the 1%. So you might ask, well, what's going on with the 1%? You know, that's all the way the news is today. Well, if you look at the premium, and this is using the SIAS data on the premium, this is the top 0.1%. This is the really rich guys relative to the average. So back in that late 60s, remember that early years I looked at, the rich guys earned about 20 times the average. Today, they earn like 70 to 80 times the average. These are incomes. They have 70 to 80 times. So if you think about what's happened is the premium has roughly 3.5 times what it used to be, right? What's interesting is if you do a plot where you compare the premiums over time, the green is the college premium, which roughly went up 200% from where it started, roughly tripled from 1979. The top 1% actually goes up less than that, and the top 0.1% goes up more. But what's remarkable is the pattern is very, very similar. So the growth, again, this gets to the notion that the growth in inequality, it's not a story of just the super rich. And nor when you, I don't know how many people, most of you weren't even born yet probably, but back in the 80s, there was this whole discussion of the underclass, which was this story that said, everybody's doing great other than this limited number of people at the bottom who are falling behind. And I think the thing you want to think about inequality is, it's a much bigger story than that. It's not just about Bill Gates. It's not just about guys at the bottom. It's something that's affecting a wide, wide swath of the population. So that's number one. And number two, it's really reflecting what's going on in the labor market. So how do we understand what's going on in the labor market? So one way to think about it is what generates growth in the demand for more skilled labor. Well, it turns out it's the same basic forces that generate economic progress. So where does progress come from? How many people in here take an economics? All right, so where does progress come from? Well, here's a picture. This is progress over a 120-year period, real per capita GDP. The blue line is the annual measures of real per capita GDP over 120 years. The red line is just a trend line fit to the data. Gives you sort of, so where progress to me is the red line. Progress is us pushing our way up that red line. And you can really see why progress is so important, just how much we gain over time. You can also see the Great Depression. You can also see the Great Recession. They don't quite look the same. They look a little different. I mean, that's another story for another day. But anyway, so where does that growth come from? What pushes us up the red line? Well, the things that push us up the red line are, number one, you have improvements in technology. Think about my period I had on the board, 1890 to today, all the technologies that have come in. The automobile, electrification, computers, all the communications, all those things that have come in. And when those new technologies come in, they spring in new forms of capital that embody those new technologies, whether it's machinery, whether it's other things. And also we invest in human capital, that is skills of the people. We got a new technology, more capital, more human capital. All those things are pushing us up the red line. They all go together. Because the things that are important to realize is that new technologies improve our output per person, make us richer. We invest in capital, that makes us richer. We invest in human capital, that makes us richer. But they're tied together. Because one thing we know is that technology tends to favor skilled labor, and complements for skilled labor, substitutes for unskilled labor. Similarly, capital, which we invest in those new technologies, tends to have the same impact. Complementary with skilled labor, substitute for low skilled labor. Human capital responds to both. Think about it as like an assembly line. What happens when we got introduction of robots on the assembly line? What was the big implication? Well, we got more output, right? We improved our technology. But what happened? Who got displaced? The low skilled, the guys working on the assembly line. Who do we need more of? People to build, design, and operate the robots. So the other thing, I won't get into it too much, is growth in the market's also a factor. So you can put this in a table. If you look at technological progress, it tends to raise output, makes us richer, pushes us up the red line, but it also tends to raise the return to education because it creates more demand for the skilled workers, less demand for the low-skilled workers. Investment in those physical capital machines. They substitute for the low-skilled workers, so they give us more output, but they raise demand for skill, lower demand for less skill. Improved integrated markets, same story. So of these forces, all of them push us up the red line. 3 of them generate a higher skill premium. The one that goes the other way is the supply of human capital. So what's happening over time in the economy is we have growing demand for skilled labor coming from all these forces. We have growing supply of skilled labor over the 20th century, tremendous increase in the level of education, tremendous increase in the supply of skills. What determines whether the education premium goes up or down? Well, it's just a comparison of the 2 sides. If demand grows faster than supply, what happens? Prices rise. If supply grows faster than demand, prices fall. This is a model that Larry Katz and I developed years ago. Turns out it works pretty well. This is just a picture of how it could explain some of the data over time. So that's the story. So why do we have more inequality? I think the biggest story is rising demand for more skilled workers. If supply keeps pace, then the returns to skill won't go up, but if supply falls short, they'll go down. So what about supply? What happens on the supply side? We're out of time?
We might hold that for some questions.
Okay, that's fine. I'll take a couple minutes. Yeah, we're probably not going to have. So on the supply side, this is a picture of the return to going to college. That is the college high school wage differentials are the blue dots. And the red line is the fraction of young people going on to college. What's amazing is the match between the two. That is, when the return to college went up, the fraction of people going to college responded. So just like supply and demand works on the labor market side, it seems to also work on the supply side. People respond the way we would think in economics. When prices rise, more people go. Okay? And in fact, what's amazing to me about this graph is economists started talking about the rising return to college about here. People had already started responding to the higher returns before us being economists even noticed it, which is kind of an interesting question. How did they know when we did it? Well, they have a lot more incentive to know what's going on. I think it's part of the answer. But that's part of the story. Because if you look at the fraction of men who went to college, again, the blue line's the premium, the fraction of men who went to college but didn't finish shot up. But the fraction of men who actually finished college didn't nearly keep pace. So one of the reasons that supply has failed to keep pace recently is that what's happened is people see the writing on the wall. They see they need more education. They see the market demand for more skills. The higher prices gives them the incentive to go, but a lot of people aren't being very successful, particularly among young men. Among women, the story's a little better. We get a lot more of both. We get a lot more women going to college not finishing, but we get a lot more graduates as well. And I know David's going to talk about that in terms of why is it maybe that women have responded better to this than men. So I'm going to finish up. What do I think the bottom line is? The bottom line is this. The demand side forces raising inequality have always been there. We have more demand for more technology, more demand, more physical capital. All those things raise the demand for skilled and educated workers. Much of the 20th century supply kept pace. Over recent years, supply has failed to keep pace, not because fewer people are going to college per se, but to some extent because people are being less successful at actually getting through. In terms, I think, of the story, we have rising inequality. What's the bottom line message? Bottom line message is this. Whether the rise in inequality, you can prevent it. or you can lament it all you want, but I think the key thing you want to take. It's telling us there's a demand, a growing demand for more skilled and educated workers that's not currently being met. And that's a signal to try to supply more. That's what happens in every market. Price of energy goes up. What do? We try to produce more energy. Price of anything goes up. Same is true in the human capital marketplace. And I think that's where I'm going to stop for now.
So yeah, David, we'll give you basically 20 minutes if you'd like it. And
detail to a substantial extent, although there may be some different takeaways as well. So I think we wanted to frame the question as sort of, is rising inequality a problem? Is it something we should be concerned about? And I think, I think there are three sort of answers that people will typically give. One of them is, yes, look at the rising concentration of national income and wealth, the rising concentration of wealth among the top 1%. That's a problem. A second answer people will sometimes give is, they'll refer to a book, famous book by Arthur Oken in 1975 that says there's a big trade-off between equality and efficiency. That if we want efficiency, we need to tolerate a lot of inequality because it gives people incentives. But people don't like that. They don't like inequality. So we're always balancing this trade-off between, letting the market work and our discomfort with the consequences of that. A third argument, and one you hear a lot less, but which I will say is more important, is a sort of an intertemporal trade-off potentially between dynamism, which is people responding to prices, making investments, getting returns on their ideas, and then dynasticism, which is the idea that the success of one generation can create inheritance or transmission of opportunity that may actually interfere with dynamism in a subsequent generation. In other words, that inequality today could actually dampen meritocracy in the future. And that's a possible concern. So let me talk about all three of these quickly. I'm going to take the first two very quickly. So this figure you've all seen a million times. This is from Atkinson's, Piccady's, and Says 2011 article in JEL. This triangular series here is the top 1% income share. Can I have that back? Great. Okay. Are we good? All right. So this is the top 1% income share. And you can see, for example, it was at a low of 10% in 1953. It was almost a quarter of all wage income in 2007. I refer to this figure somewhat dismissively as inequality porn. People love to stare at it. It's incredibly engrossing. Like most porn, it's kind of from what's important. So I'd like you to stop looking at it now. But the point what I want to make, I think I very much agree with what Kevin said, that I think of this as being a continuum, on the continuum of a lot of the phenomena that has raised the return to skill over time. So concentrating on this at the expense of the factors driving rising inequality more broadly, I think is an unproductive distraction. Not that this isn't a big deal, it is. If you redistributed all those gains over the last 30 years to the other 90% of households, it would increase average households income by 7%. We'll do that, and if we did that, it's not clear all those gains would occur. Okay, so I do not think this is a major reason to be concerned about equality itself. A second one is the big trade-off, this notion that the if we tolerate inequality, it will, if we tolerate the market, it will create all this discomfort with inequality. I also don't think that's so obvious. Again, this looks very much like what Kevin showed you. Here is the rising college premium. Here is the rising supply of college workers, right? So actually, this doesn't look like a problem at all. We have rising return to skill, and we have a rising supply of skilled workers. I think people in general complaining about the high college premium, the fact that college educated workers are making a lot, that's not where their concerns are. So I'm going to say that's also not a very important reason to be very concerned about inequality. So now let me turn to the third. And here's where I think one can start to get concerned. This figure on the left shows you the relationship between inequality at a point in time in countries and economic mobility, or actually immobility, which is measured as the correlation between, let's say, a son at age 35 and his father's earnings when his father was 35. This is typically done for males because of the labor participation issues are less significant when you're comparing across generations of males. So you can see these are countries that have more income inequality going in this direction. And this is the intergenerational correlation of income between fathers and sons. So you can think of this as 1 minus mobility. So if this, for example, were 1.0, it would say that your income, the income of a son is exactly predicted by the income of a dad. If it's 0.5, it means actually about a quarter of that is predicted. But what you see is that countries that have more inequality have less mobility, right? So the US and the UK, which are the two highest inequality countries in the developed world, have the lowest mobility. And I think many people find that surprising. Many people think of the US as a country where, the rags to riches country. And certainly there are rags to riches stories. But on the scale of modern market societies, we actually are not that. If you want to see more rags to riches, at least in relative terms, you would go to Finland, Norway, Denmark, and Sweden. These are countries that do not have very high levels of inequality, but the likelihood that someone moves from the 20th percentile of the distribution to the 80th percentile is substantially higher than it is in the United States. Interestingly, it's also important to point out that if you make the same graph for the college earnings premium versus mobility, you see the same thing, which just reinforces the point that Kevin was making, that a lot of inequality is returns to skills, right? So countries that have high inequality have high returns to skills, but those countries also have lower mobility. Is that a concern? Well, it's a concern when you think, if you sort of roll the tape forward and say, well, we've had a very substantial increase in inequality over the last 30 years. Does that mean we should expect less mobility over time? And is that lack of mobility or decline in mobility a problem if it's occurred? Okay, so first let me talk about why would that occur, and then whether that is or is not. So Kevin talked a lot about the rising premium to college, and so these are indexed real earnings by education level for men on the left, women on the right, from 1963 to 2012. So 1963 is 1.0, and then you can see for people with men with a post-BA degree, that's risen to almost 2.0. But the happy news in this picture is that real earnings levels have risen a lot for people with college and post-college education. The unhappy news in the figure is that real earnings have fallen, not trivially, for people who have less than a college education, high school dropout, high school grad, some college. And these declines are on the order of about 20%. That's a very substantial fall in earnings, and very rare to see, actually, in a modern economy, a lot of technological progress. Usually, workers are becoming more skilled over time. There are relatively fewer of them. And in general, we expect to see their wages rise. Let me just take.
I think maybe.
Yeah. Okay, you hear me. Great. Okay, good. Now I have 3 devices in my hands. Okay. So the good news, the at least half of the good news of the rising college premium is actually the bad news of the falling non-college wage level, right? So the good news is there's never been a better time to go to college because it boosts your earnings so much in percentage terms. But a lot of the reason is it's never been a worse time to not go to college. And so that is a mechanism. So why is that important? You might feel more optimistic about inequality in terms of its long-term consequences for mobility if it were sort of raising all boats, but raising some more than others. But in fact, we have experienced a type of inequality, especially in male earnings, that has raised some boats a lot and others have kind of sank. And that could be a problem. Why would that be a problem? Well, this figure shows you for US male employment to population ratios and real wages, these are between 1979 and 2011, men ages 25 to 39, this is the percentage change in hourly wages among those employed. And these are broken into groups greater than college, college grad, some college, high school grad, high school dropout. So you can see these range from positive 40 to negative 30. And then on the y-axis is the percentage change in male employment to population rates. And what you see is groups that have had falling earnings among workers have very sharp falls in labor force participation rates. Right? So we know that that implies very strongly that there's been a negative and adverse demand shifts against those group of workers, and wages have fallen enough that they are choosing not to work, or employers even at the market wage are not choosing to employ them, which is possible with minimum wages, or possible when there are people who even at any wage you think, well, this person is sort of more trouble than they're worth. Well, why is that? So you might say, well, that's a problematic for a variety of reasons. We want people working. If they're not working, they're going to get into all kinds of trouble. Well, one thing that they're not doing that we might want them to do is they're not marrying. So in particular, this, you might say, why is Autor putting up the same figure again? But this is not the same figure. On the x-axis is the percentage change in male hourly wages. On the y-axis is the change in marriage rates among women 25-39 of these same groups. And so what you see is, we know these men, their wages have fallen, their labor force participation rates have fallen, and women are choosing not to marry them, which I think is, a rational choice. And it's a rational choice because marriage is, among many other things, an economic institution. And marrying a person who does not have good lifetime earnings capacity is basically, it's like adopting another mouth to feed, right? It's not a attractive proposition. However, understandably, women are still choosing to have children, and that's for many people, raising children is a central mission in life, and so as a consequence of that, many more children are being born into households that are single-headed, and in the vast, vast majority of cases, single-headed households or mother-headed households. So you can see the fraction of children born to non-married mothers has risen from under 18% to about 43% between 1980 and 2009. And you can see that's rising among every demographic group. It's risen more among whites and Hispanics than among blacks. It's higher among blacks. It's rising at all education levels, but it's particularly concentrated among non-college workers, non-college blacks, non-college whites, non-college Hispanics. Increasingly, marriage is actually a kind of an elite institution. It's something that college graduates do a lot of. They marry, they tend to stay married, divorce rates have fallen, and the modal child of a college graduate is going to be living in a two-parent household. And then for most people for the majority of adults who have less than college education, marriage is increasingly a rarity, but childbearing is not. So what that means is a large fraction of US children will be raised in households that are single-headed. Now, that's fine as a moral choice, but as an economic choice, it does have some potential downsides. So the first is, if we look at poverty rates by household structure, this shows you the poverty rate for female householders with no husband present, and that's the majority of single-parent households or female-headed households. It hovers around 40%. It hasn't risen over time, but the fraction of kids in such households has risen a lot. So what does that mean? It means children born to single-parent households, in general, will have fewer resources just because there'll be less income coming in. So there's a material poverty. And then of course there's a poverty of time, because if you have a single parent who is working to support the entire family, that parent is not going to have the same level of time and attention to devote to their kids. And then I will say, as a third factor, since many of these households are mother-headed households, it also means that the boys in those households are particularly less likely to have a male parental role model in the household. And that may be particularly disadvantageous for them. So what has this done? Just to put those pieces together, I'm drawing an arrow from the falling market wage levels of less educated workers to falling marriage rates of men and women to rising fractions of children born in non-married households who have access to fewer material resources and less parental time. And so what that does is it creates greater inequality of household conditions for children. And that's the mechanism that I am concerned about as leading to, from dynamism in the labor market to dynasticism across generations, because of the greater disparity of household environments to which kids are born, right? So someone, to put it very simplistically, some would say, choosing the right parents has become more important than ever. How can you see this? Well, one way you can see this is if you look at expenditures, average expenditure on enrichment activities for kids. Now, by enrichment, I mean music lessons, math supplementation, sports activities. This is average expenditure for the bottom income quintile, the bottom fifth. This is the average expenditure for the top quintile. You can see this has risen from 835 to 1315. That's a very substantial rise, right? That's a 40 or 50% increase. This has risen from from 3,500 to about 9,000, right? And if we were to, and this is just by quintile, if you were to go up, you would see that fanning out just like the income distribution. Well, does that matter? I mean, maybe you could argue, oh, come on, all those music lessons and math. Everyone knows that that's just expensive babysitting. However, if you look at years of completed schooling, comparing top versus bottom quintiles, you also see this increasing differential, right? Which indicates that it is translating into a steeper relationship between your household circumstances and your years of completed education. And we know that education is going to be the most central determinant of your lifetime earnings. You can also see this in terms of college attainment. So this shows you bachelor's degree attainment by age 24 by income quartile. These are quartiles now, not quintiles, so 4 of them. And so here's the bottom quartile, second, third, and here's the top 25%. Well, the good news here is it's risen for everyone, right? The bottom quartile has risen from 6% to 9%. It's a 50% rise, right? However, for the top quartile, it's risen from 40% to 77%, so basically a doubling. And of course, the ratio is remarkably high. One cannot get too excited about that, right? It's gone from 0 to twice 0 plus a little bit of rounding error. And so what we see, and you might have hoped in an era when education has become much more important and we have mechanisms, student loans and financial aid, that in theory should make education more accessible, that the rising return to education has has steepened the relationship between family resources and college going rather than made it shallower, right? You could have imagined a world where we say, wow, the return to education is rising. Everybody should be given the resources and support to get them through college. That's not occurring. Now, that's certainly not simply a function of the financial aid system or the way colleges work. It's also all the preparation and investment in the human capital of those kids that prepares them to enter college, persist in college, and complete college. Now, I'm going to end the last 2 slides. You might say, well, look, I presented you a bunch of correlations, right? We know kids in single-parent households, they have access to fewer resources. We know that they're not as likely to go on for higher education. But how do we really know that that has anything to do with those circumstances? Maybe that's just maybe that's the way they were, sort of they were born with lower capacity somehow. I don't think many people want to say that out loud. I can say it out loud because I'm putting it up for debate. But here's one piece of evidence we do have. So the moving to opportunity experiment was a very ambitious and unusual social experiment. It started in the early 1990s. The principal investigators were Kevin, my co-author, Larry Katz, Jeff Kling, Jeff Lieben, Jens Ludwig, Lisa Sanbon-Matsu, Raj Chetty, Nathan Hendren, and others. And what this did is it took about 4,600 low-income families living in public high-poverty housing projects, and it randomized, after gaining their agreement to participate in the study, they were randomized into one of three groups. One group was basically not given any additional services beyond the public housing they already received. One was given Section 8 vouchers, meaning that it's money that you can use for rent in various houses, but no constraint on where you use it. And the third was moved to lower poverty neighborhoods that were below average poverty levels, and given housing there. And the question is, did this have any effect? This was a dramatic change in the environment without changing other circumstances of the households. Didn't give them employment, didn't give them additional money. And I should say, these are essentially all single mom-headed households, majority African-American, Hispanic, although not exclusively so. So what do we see? Well, I should say, I'm going to summarize this loosely because the actual results of the study are embargoed at present. And so I'm translating the abstract into even less precise language at the request of the authors. But when we look at children who are below age 13 when their families moved, we find improved college attendance rates, substantial rises in earnings in their mid-20s on the order of about 30%, reduced likelihood of single parenthood, and increased quality of neighborhoods in adulthood. So moving people out of projects and out of poverty actually seems to have changed not just their immediate material circumstances, but actually the lifetime trajectories of their kids' skill development, education, marital choices, parental choices, and earnings. So it really suggests that these inequality of circumstances do matter. They exert a causal effect. And so to wrap up, I'm not worried about the 1% per se. I think rising returns to skill is in general a positive thing. What I'm worried about is the inefficiency that comes from deprivation in perhaps the bottom third or bottom quartile of the earnings distribution, where it's inefficient, where the fact is that if families do not have the right resources and kids do not, kids can't borrow against their future human capital to do their own enrichment exercises, right? And so those kids may be inefficiently underinvested in, and we actually fail to realize the potential. In fact, it's quite possible the opposite is true too, that there's inefficient overinvestment in kids of the top percentiles, right? The amount of money I spend on my kids, enrichment activities is ridiculous. But I'm fortunate, right? And so, so my concern about thinking about the development of inequality is not the market per se, is not the high returns to skill, it's not the rewards, but the possibility that the inequality that transmits into the next generation actually inhibits investment and success of people who have high potential.
I think we're going to follow along with the way we've been doing things and kind of extend our time. So I think we'll allow maybe 6 minutes if they would like it for each question. We'll have Kevin take the first question first, and then David take the second question first, which will also allow us to